Welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson, in for Pat Doris this week. Tonight, we continue our look at the Endangered Species Act, 50 years after it was passed. Last night, we told you about the plight of the northern spotted owl. It was a flashpoint of conflict in the 1990s, and while it's still contentious between environmentalists and timber interests, the owl conversation has largely faded from the spotlight. So what took its place, at least in Northeast Oregon? The gray wolf. Few species stir up emotional reactions from both sides like wolves. Environmental reporter Cale Williams takes us to Wallowa County, where in just the last 15 years or so, the predators returned to Oregon.
The howl of a wolf is a powerful thing. For some, it conjures feelings of awe, reverence, wildness, and independence. For others, it means a threat nearby, something that could cost them and even disrupt their way of life. In Enterprise, Oregon, tucked into the northeast corner of the state, it's not hard to find folks on either side of the issue.
The first pack was here in Wallowa County.
John Williams is the chair of the Wolf Committee for the Oregon Cattlemen's Association.
Den was down here to your right behind this tree. It was known as the Wolf Highway in the early days.
For him, the problem with wolves is close to home.
Saw the wolves come by that house with the smoke on it. In 2009, we had our first pack. The next year, all of a sudden, they started killing livestock.
Williams has been tracking the increasing presence of wolves since they arrived. And he took us to some of the hot spots.
The tallest tree right there, they went into that thicket.
Wolves have been a contentious issue since settlers came to the West.
This is where the wolves went through. Tracks right here at this gate.
As apex predators, they mostly feed on deer and elk, but they also sometimes prey on livestock, setting up a conflict with ranchers that's lasted more than 100 years. That conflict is what led to their eradication from Oregon. With bounties put on their heads, the last of Oregon's original wolves was killed in 1947. But wolves would come back to Oregon, this time with protection under the Endangered Species Act, at least for a while. Those protections were lifted more than a decade ago, so Northeast Oregon seemed the perfect place to go to find out if these animals should be seen as an endangered species success story or something else entirely.
That's the camera.
After being gone more than half a century, wolf sightings began to pop up in eastern Oregon in the mid-2000s.
We used to celebrate a lot when we would get like a picture of a wolf butt, and that was like, yeah.
As wolves from Idaho began dispersing west.
But now we actually get some really awesome pictures.
That was around the same time Rob Clavins, the field coordinator with Oregon Wild, started working on the issue.
Wolves were starting to make their way back here into Oregon, and we just realized that there really wasn't anybody advocating on behalf of wolves.
And it didn't take long for him to see the draw of wolf country.
About 10 years ago, my wife and I moved out here, and we'd really started to fall in love with the place.
Where do you think we should put the camera?
Now, when he's not working for Oregon Wild, mounting trail cams or advocating for environmental issues,
Come on, babe.
Clavins runs a small working farm, a bed and breakfast, outside of Enterprise, not far from John Williams' place.
Come on, guys. There you go. There you go.
So Clavins has watched firsthand as Oregon's wolf population has grown. From just a couple transplants from Idaho to more than 175 wolves, living in 24 packs. Those wolves have made their way out of Northeast Oregon and now have territory in the Cascades, in southern Oregon, and have even established the first pack in California in more than a century. And while their numbers have grown, the sentiment that led to their extermination in Oregon,
This is a wolf highway,
remains.
I cannot underestimate the emotional trauma, the stress that the wolf is putting on ranchers. It is a game changer.
As Williams sees it, wolves, or more specifically their tendency to kill livestock, are threatening the way of life ranchers have enjoyed for decades.
It's the lifestyle. It's that I get to go out and I get to run a ranch and all the things that go with it. And today, you can't say that in wolf country because lifestyle has been taken from the rancher.
Now, it's true that wolves sometimes kill livestock. Last year, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife investigated 121 suspected wolf attacks, confirming 76 of them. and that's a 55% increase from the previous year. Each wolf kill can represent a huge loss as well, with adult beef cows going for upwards of $1,500. Wolf attacks represent just a fraction of all livestock losses, though, and the state has a fund that compensates ranchers. But Williams said the effects of wolves on cattle can't just be measured in dead cows.
Their conception rate goes down about 10%. The calves come in 60 to 80 pounds lighter in the fall, if it's the right timing. These are the types of things that ranchers are dealing with. It's not the dead animals that really economically get you.
And Williams is clear about what he thinks the solution should be.
When a wolf gets in trouble, it dies. And when it doesn't get in trouble, and it stays away from tolerant people, from people and their livestock and their private property, it lives and it breeds.
But there are rules about when a wolf can be killed in Oregon. When they first returned to the state and had federal protection, they were off limits. Protections were lifted in 2011, and wolves came under management from the state, which said wolves could only be killed in certain scenarios. Today, that means a wolf can be killed after 2 confirmed attacks within a 9-month span, but only if the rancher has used deterrents like range riders, noisemakers, and hazing. 24 wolves were killed in Oregon last year, 17 of them by humans. Of those, 6 were killed for repeated attacks on livestock, but another 7 were killed illegally.
I recognize that when it happens to you, it's a big deal, and we should do what we can to prevent it. But we just think that killing wolves should truly be the option of last resort.
Beyond that, he points to research that shows killing wolves often comes with unintended consequences. Wolves have complex social structures, and killing just one wolf in a pack can sometimes make the remaining wolves more likely to look for easy prey, like livestock.
When you shoot the wrong wolf, when you disrupt those pack structures, you disrupt the social dynamics of that pack, and you often make problems worse, which is why...
Clavins was quick to acknowledge that he doesn't know all the ins and outs of ranching like ranchers do, and there's no silver bullet to the problem.
I often liken killing wolves to itching a mosquito bite. It's easy, it's cathartic, it's just kind of the reflexive thing you do and sort of, oh, that should work. But the reality is that when you look at the science, it shows that there are better ways to do things.
So if you've been paying attention to wolf issues in the Pacific Northwest, this story might feel a little familiar so far. You've got ranchers on one side who want to protect their livestock. You've got wolf advocates on the other who want to protect the wolves. But there's another group that often gets left out of the conversation.
My name is Julian Matthews. I'm an enrolled member of the Nez Perce tribe.
In the mid-90s, the Nez Perce played an instrumental role in bringing wolves back to this part of the West. The federal government had been considering reintroducing wolves in the West for years, but Idaho's state legislature voted against the plan. So in 1994, the Nez Perce became the first tribe to lead the reintroduction of an endangered species into its native territory.
You know, they did these ceremonies. The elders were there singing songs and welcoming our brother wolf, the spirit of the wolf, back to our land.
Well, the wolf and other animals would...
Wilbur Slockish Jr. is an elder in the Klickitat band of Yakima Nation, and he remembers hearing stories about the wolf from his grandmother and the role they played on the landscape.
And I distinctly remember her talking about the wolf. The wolf, he was there to take care of the sick, the old, and the injured animals. We would eat no disease or sickly animal or injured animal. That was his food.
You know, as tribal members, we have...
And while Matthews looks back with pride at the role his tribe played in wolves returning to the West,
they're living beings, and so we want to protect that.
He fears for their future.
So the Creator put us here to live here, and so we should feel the same respect towards them. Politically, they're not popular.
In my mind, we need to get control of it. A wolf...
Despite their political unpopularity and some ranchers wanting more freedom to kill them, wolf populations have been growing across the West.
Yes, guys, yes.
And both Clavins and Williams, two people who don't agree on much about wolves, say they've seen things move in the right direction. Williams says the state has been more responsive to the concerns of ranchers, even if he wished they were quicker.
In the last 6 months, we've seen changes. As I tell them, it's not near fast enough for what's happening out here with our livestock, the losses that we're having.
Come on, pig.
And Clavins, he says that the heated debates from a decade ago have cooled.
In the time that I've been here, I've seen attitudes change. Certainly there are still really entrenched views, but generally I think things have moderated.
So does that mean that gray wolves should be looked at as a win for the Endangered Species Act? For all they disagree on, Clavins and Williams both say no. though their reasons differ.
You know, should there be wolves here? You know, I think it's fine that we have wolves where wolves should be. And they're going to get there eventually because of the Endangered Species Act. But it's a sledgehammer when a tap hammer should have been used.
The Endangered Species Act has been successful in making species not go extinct. It hasn't been as good at getting species to biological recovery, but to the extent it's fallen short there, it's not because the Endangered Species Act is broken, it's because it's starving. We need more protections for wildlife, especially in an age of climate change and increasing development.
Kil Williams joins me now. Kil, great story there. A couple of questions for you. First, you mentioned the 2022 count for the number of dead wolves. What does that look like for this year?
Yeah, so the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife hasn't put out their official wolf report, which has all those numbers, but I went through the whole year's worth of, all the statistics that they have. And so far there have been 17 wolves that have been killed for attacking livestock this year. That's up from 7 last year. And there have been 2 wolves just in the last month that were killed illegally, one in Baker County and one down in Jackson County.
Interesting. Okay. And then there's also the idea of shipping wolves to Colorado or other states. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's true. Colorado just became the first state on a voter mandate to reintroduce wolves. And so Oregon is going to be sending 10 wolves out to Colorado. And what's funny is that people on both sides of this issue, both John Williams and Rob Clavins, neither of them are for this. John Williams, he says that he doesn't want to export the problems that he's seen in Eastern Oregon out to another rural community. Rob Clavins, he says that there just aren't enough wolves in Oregon where we can afford to be giving them away.
But seems like that's something that is going to go through here soon?
That's true. Yeah, it's going to be sometime this month, maybe next month. They're going to be trapping wolves out in Eastern Oregon, sending them off to Colorado. And
then a question, you showed where wolves currently are in Oregon, but could wolves expand to other parts of the state? What would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, they've been expanding. And, historically, when there were wolves all over Oregon, there were wolves all over Oregon. I mean, that was obviously before we had things like I-5 running up the middle of the state and big cities developed everywhere. But in theory, these are very resilient animals and they're very adaptable. They can live just about anywhere.
Great. And what's coming up tomorrow?
Tomorrow we're going to be focusing on salmon. It's one of the most iconic fish species that we have here on the West Coast. It's really interwoven into the fabric of the Pacific Northwest, but it's not doing well, and there's a number of reasons why. And it hasn't really hit anybody as hard as it's hit the indigenous tribes here. We're going to get into all of that tomorrow.
Great. Thank you, Kil. Appreciate your report. We would love to hear your thoughts. What are you thinking about wolves in Oregon after seeing Kil's segment just then? Did anything change your perspective or not, and why? Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Now let's take a look at some of your thoughts on the spotted owl memories that you sent us after part 1 of Kil's series last night. Anne wrote to us, I was backpacking in Mount Rainier National Park in 1988 and I spotted a spotted owl just off the trail. I was able to get a slightly blurry photo and it was a highlight of the trip. As an Ohioan, it was one of the many special PNW experiences that led me to move to Oregon the following year. Thanks for sharing that memory, Anne. There are certainly some strong opinions out there regarding the economic impact of the spotted owl's legacy, including this one from Kim.
I was a kid in Roseburg, growing up in Roseburg, and my dad worked at a mill, and his job was cut short. Well, I think he had to take early retirement. But the controversy with the spotted owl, I mean, it's an owl for crying out loud. Yeah, it's a frickin' owl for crying out loud, okay? It's an owl.
A different viewer who wanted to stay anonymous felt differently, writing, nowadays there exists the capability to farm trees for paper and for lumber. There's no reason to destroy the natural habitat of the old-growth forest. Logging as we knew it 200 years ago should be stopped. These huge forests play a critical part in climate control, and the more we remove of them, the more our climate is going to suffer from the lack of these dense natural forests. Well, please keep your comments and your questions coming. Remember, on Friday, we'll share more of your thoughts, and we'll have Kale answer any questions you may have for him throughout the week. Still to come on the story, we talk a lot about the homeless crisis here in Portland, but it's not unique to the Rose City. After the break, Blair Best takes us to Seaside, where recent storms have highlighted the homeless crisis there in a big way. How the city is responding to calls for more resources, and an update on those tiny homes in Seaside that were sitting empty when Blair last visited nearly 2 months ago. That's when the story returns. We are in the final week of the KGW Great Toy Drive. One of the easiest ways to help is to give online. You can go to kgw.com/toy and click Donate Cash. If you make a cash donation, we will shop for you. Or you can always do it the good old-fashioned way. Just drop off a new unwrapped toy at any IQ Credit Union, Fred Meyer, or local Toyota dealership. Now let's talk about the homeless crisis, and not here in the metro, but to our west along the Oregon coast. Homeless people in Seaside are still drying out and trying to recover storm-soaked belongings after our round of atmospheric rivers earlier this month. They're understandably frustrated, but so are neighbors, and the city's limited resources are hampering what many say is needed, a quick fix. Blair Best has the story.
This coastal homeless camp, hidden behind a seaside recycling center, is a shell of what it once was.
Everybody's getting soaked all the time.
The aftermath of recent storms are not just seen, but felt.
Water was running right through my tent. I would have nothing again.
All the trash floats, so it floated towards the river, into the bushes, and everywhere.
Now, with the storms in Seaside come not just the flooding, but extreme high winds that, as you can see, just rip the tents apart, just adding to the damage.
When you got that much water around you, I mean, it was actually scary.
The city is now moving the homeless people a few hundred feet away to higher ground.
As the closer they get to our facility, the worse it gets.
Doc Shaw runs the auto repair shop next to this new site.
Nobody ever said that they were moving this here. It seems like the city has done this over and over again.
It wouldn't have done us much good to get input from the neighborhood because we understand the neighborhood's not going to want it, and we can understand that.
Seaside city manager notes they're feeling the pressure from all sides to quickly find a solution.
The state has required us to have a location for our homeless to locate, and so we're complying with the state's mandate.
In that new site, are there enough spaces for all the homeless people?
Right now, no, we're in the process of transitioning.
Next week, the city hopes to have room for 7 more tents in the new site, the one that's not prone to flooding, along with buying other land for even more tents.
There needs to be a few more resources.
Like a permanent overnight warming center, something Lindsay Morrison, who runs a local nonprofit, says Seaside desperately needs, but there isn't enough funding.
You can't count on them to be open when a storm comes.
The only place that's consistent would be erecting their own tent in our campsite.
An answer people like Doc are tired of hearing.
Some customers have went away because they're worried about what's happening. So I'm losing business. When are we going to stop just throwing something at it and start looking for the right fix?
Now, almost everyone involved here, from the homeless people to the neighbors, they all call this situation a mess. But unfortunately, it all comes down to money, and the city of Seaside and the nonprofits that help the homeless people here all don't have enough. But we are told that the city is working on a proposal with the state to get more funding for a warming center. And they also tell us a hotel is being turned into transitional housing. But with most things when it comes to housing, this will all take time. What is also taking time are those 15 tiny homes meant for homeless people, still sitting empty. Back in October, the city manager told us they were waiting on the nonprofit that's running that project to submit their building plans. Now, we asked the city manager today for an update, and he tells us they are still waiting on those plans. In Seaside, Blair Best, KGW News.
Our thanks to Blair for that report. Up next on the story, the state of Washington has a law banning conversion therapy for minors. And advocates of the law scored a big win this week when the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear a case against the ban. Does that mean it will stand forever? Not quite. We'll explain when the story returns. Turning now to both Washington, D.C. and the state of Washington, where the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear a case out of the Evergreen State regarding conversion therapy. Back in 2018, lawmakers in Olympia passed a law banning the practice when it comes to minors. Conversion therapy is widely criticized and is usually aimed at encouraging or persuading gay or lesbian minors to change their sexual orientations. and transgender children to identify as the gender assigned to them at birth. A Christian counselor in Washington challenged the law, claiming it violated his free speech rights and his right to freely practice his religion. The Ninth Circuit Court rejected that argument, leading to the appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the justices voted 6-3 to not hear the case. Justices Brett Kavanaugh, Samuel Alito, and Clarence Thomas were in the minority. As one law professor puts it, the court's vote does not mean justices agree with banning conversion therapy. They simply declined to hear the case.
That's part of the confusion that happens quite a bit, is that, oh, they didn't take this case. That means they believe it's a valid law in Washington state. They simply declined to hear the case. And the net effect is that then the Ninth Circuit ruling remains in effect, which says it's a valid law.
But the conversion therapy debate could end up before the U.S. Supreme Court again. Other circuit courts have ruled the practice that's discredited by all major medical organizations should be legal because it's a form of protected speech. All it's going to take is another challenge to a state law. Activists who pushed for Washington's law in the first place are happy with the Supreme Court vote, including the co-founder of Born Perfect, an advocacy organization that helps states pass conversion therapy bans.
We know that individuals like Tingley, who brought this case, are claiming that they have a right to treat anyone they want under their license and however he wants. And that's just not true. The state of Washington has a boards of professionalism, and if you're a licensed professional, you are obligated to follow conduct that has been proven medical practices, not just to choose something that you make up.
Washington's law prohibits licensed healthcare professionals from performing conversion therapy on minors, but they are allowed to discuss it. Adults can receive the treatment if they wish, but children in Washington can still go through the practice because the law does not apply to non-licensed counselors who are serving at, say, a church, for example. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there with thoughts on this. We'd like to hear what you think. Email thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Thank you so much for watching tonight. That is the end of our show. We appreciate your time. The good stuff is coming your way next, and be sure to tune again tomorrow night for part 3 of Cale Williams' series on the Endangered Species Act. Tomorrow he's talking about salmon. We know there's a lot of thoughts and conversation there. You won't want to miss it. We'll see you tomorrow at 6:30. Have a great night.